Okay, well, welcome to what is the first and hopefully a series of short little talks about coastal protection. Today I'm joined by Izzy Clarke. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
So Izzy is our subject matter expert on coastal protection, specifically about coastal wetlands. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Izzy Clarke, and I work for Ducks Unlimited Canada, and I'm a conservation program specialist, which basically means that my job is to try to protect wetlands. And I'm based in Halifax, but I also work across Nova Scotia.
Okay. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what coastal wetlands are and what components make up a coastal wetland?
Basically, coastal wetlands are wetlands that are in coastal areas. It sounds a little too simple to be true, but it is true. And basically what sets coastal wetlands aside is that they normally will receive some tidal input. So they'll be, instead of being freshwater wetlands, they'll be brackish or saline. And in Nova Scotia, we usually go about identifying them by the plant communities as well as the soil types and saturation. So, if we go to a site and we're like, okay, we see typical coastal wetland species, and we dig some little soil test pits and we say, okay, it's hydric soil. We say this is a coastal wetland. And they're really cool because they have really specialized plant communities. It's actually a really harsh environment when you think about it, because a lot of these wetlands are in the intertidal zone, which means that they basically get flooded twice a day with the tides, with salty water. So as you can imagine, that's not a very friendly place for a lot of different species. So you get these really cool, highly specialized species that can basically only exist in these environments.
So there's definitely a lot of specificity that is looked into as to identifying the wetlands and the species that live there, but why are those aspects of wetlands actually important, I guess, both to us in general, but also to this idea of, coastal flooding and what we've been looking at?
Yeah, so coastal wetlands, especially salt marshes, are really, really important. Big picture on an ecological scale, because they're so specialized, they're extremely important for many different species at risk. As well as migratory birds, and they host a lot of globally rare species in our region, which is really cool. They are really productive ecosystems, and they kind of create this really important foundation for a whole different host of food webs, and that actually includes humans. So coastal wetlands in our region impact our fisheries because coastal wetlands provide a really important fish nursery habitat. So if you lose all the coastal wetlands, that will impact the fishery. They also host really culturally important species like sweetgrass and glasswort and things like that. And then, of course, from the climate change side of things, coastal wetlands are both really sensitive to the impacts of climate change and also really important in protecting us from the impacts of climate change. And they can protect us in two ways. Coastal wetlands are actually really good at both mitigating climate change, which means slowing the effects of climate change, and also adapting to the effects of climate change. So there are some effects of climate change that we kind of have a good idea are coming down the pipe, and we know that wetlands are really important for that. And on the mitigation side, wetlands are basically carbon storing powerhouses, so they're really, really important carbon sinks. And I'll maybe talk about that a little bit later, about what we're doing with that. And then from the mitigation side, coastal wetlands really help buffer us from storm surge, so really intense wave activity can protect us from the erosion that comes from that, because it will literally buffer the waves before they reach us. And as long as coastal wetlands have room to migrate landward with sea level rise, they can also help protect us from sea level rise. So it's kind of like a threefer. They're super, super important.
Yeah, I didn't know about the fact that they sort of migrated over time, even if sea levels rise. So they sound like they're pretty adaptable and effective. So I guess what are people doing to protect those wetlands, and at the same time, what could be done in the future to better protect them if they're being lost?
Yeah, I mean, luckily, coastal wetlands are really high profile right now. The Genuine Progress Index estimated that, well, for a little bit of background, since the 1700s, we've lost about 80% of salt marshes just in the Fundy region, which is separate from Lunenburg, obviously, but 50% of salt marshes across the province. And with that in mind, the Genuine Progress Index estimated that we still receive about $400 million worth of ecosystem services in Nova Scotia every single year from coastal wetlands. So even though they're really threatened and we have lost a lot of them, they're super important. On the flip side of that, the same GPI estimated that the loss of wetlands costs about $2 billion a year in ecological services in the province at the current rate of loss. So we have lost a lot of them, but luckily the impact and importance of coastal wetlands is being recognized kind of at like every level of government and with a lot of like, you know, members of the public even as well. And maybe before I get into what we're actually doing to protect wetlands, I'll talk about some of the specific threats to coastal wetlands, if that's okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we already talked a little bit about climate change. So sea level rise, of course, is a big threat to coastal wetlands because if sea levels rise, where do the coastal wetlands go? And the other side of that threat is coastal development. So I already mentioned that we have already lost a lot of our coastal wetlands in this province, and a lot of that is to coastal development and agriculture. But specifically, what happens in this province is everybody wants to be by the ocean. So what we do is we build roads, we build towns, we build wharfs, we build seawalls, everything like that right on the coast. And what happens is those hard barriers, those hard barriers basically prevent coastal wetlands from moving upland with sea level rise. Because coastal wetlands are actually very adaptable. So if you imagine the province of Nova Scotia with no roads, no towns, no nothing, with the sea level rising, coastal wetlands would actually just creep up the shore and they would be able to adapt and continue to provide their ecosystem services. However, if that coastal wetland butts up against a road or a seawall or whatever, it actually just ends up going below the water level, which is, you know, it's not good. It ends up drowning. This phenomenon is known as coastal squeeze, and it's a really big threat. Just wanted to get that in there.
Absolutely. No, that's news to me.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah, and then there's a bunch of also like trickle-down effects from like the other effects of sea level rise, like increased pressure from like invasive species, ocean acidification, kind of like the usual suspects. Yeah. And on a happier note, what's being done to protect them? The good answer is like actually quite a lot. And, you know, wetland protection in general, but also coastal wetland protection is kind of happening top down and bottom up at like many different levels, which is great. And what I find encouraging is that there's a way that every single individual can interact with coastal wetlands and try to, you know, pursue their protection. So just like super high level with top-down approaches, there are federal and provincial laws that protect wetlands in general, but also coastal wetlands. So people are probably keeping an eye on the Coastal Protection Act that will help support the protection of coastal wetlands. And also municipalities are taking a really proactive approach. Like it's really nice to work with the municipality of the District of Lunenburg because you guys know that you can't wait around and you kind of have to have a proactive approach. And so it's really nice to see you considering, you know, like different protection, like coastal protection options. And, you know, we've been working together since last year to better understand wetlands in general, both coastal and inland. So that's really encouraging. For the individual who is looking to get involved with coastal wetland protection, there are tons of different organizations that you can get involved with. The Nature Conservancy has a lot of coastal properties and they're always kind of looking to pick up more, and they have a really robust stewardship program that basically anybody can join. The Nova Scotia Nature Trust, same story. And of course, get involved with ducks. I'm going to do that little plug. You know, there's lots of ways that you can get involved with us. If you have a coastal property and you think that there might be coastal wetlands, I would definitely encourage you to reach out to me. My email is i_clarke@ducks.ca. I would love to talk with you about different protection measures that we can take. Also, if you notice that your property is being kind of affected by storm surge and sea level rise and you think maybe there'd be an opportunity for coastal wetland restoration, that's also something we do, so please do get in touch. Yeah, and then we also have a bunch of like outreach programs like Treasured Wetlands, and we always accept volunteers and everything like that. So yeah, I'd love to hear from you if you're interested. The Green Shores for Homes program is being led by the Stewardship Center for BC and Transcoastal Adaptations, and it's basically a voluntary program for coastal landowners who are interested in having like more ecologically sound shoreline management on their own property, and it kind of gives you like a bunch of best management practices with things like climate change and sea level rise and coastal erosion, all those things in mind. So that's a really great thing for somebody who's motivated to protect their shoreline with kind of like an ecological slant. And I also, there's a lot of cool research coming out about coastal wetlands in this region specifically, like with Ducks, our Institute for Wetlands and Waterfowl Research, which is our science branch. For the last few years, they've been doing carbon stock monitoring in salt marshes. Yeah, it's really, really cool, and they're just starting to come out with some of their preliminary results, which is really exciting. And that work is happening mostly in the Fundy area and the Northumberland Strait, but it's not really like specifically geographically constrained. That's just kind of where it was convenient to do sampling and stuff. But yeah, and the goal of that, because we know that coastal wetlands are really important for carbon storage, but the goal of this work is to kind of compare the carbon storage capacity of restored coastal wetlands versus pristine, scare quotes, pristine coastal wetlands. And this work is still in progress, but what's really, really exciting is that we're seeing that even restored wetlands are stacking up really well against pristine wetlands. So it's really cool to see and very encouraging to know that like coastal restoration really works for carbon storage. Yeah, and I mean, of course, this work can kind of just help justify how important coastal wetlands are in the fight against climate change. So it helps with, getting more funding for this work and getting this kind of written into, practices at different levels of government and stuff like that.
All right. Well, that's awesome. Well, I just wanted to thank you again. That's all the questions that I have, but thanks for lending your time and expertise.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was really fun.
I appreciate it.